This is Tom Scott's Podcast Express. Conversations about music, movies, politics, art, and a whole lot more with some of Tom's very special friends. Without further ado, here's Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Scott. It's no exaggeration to say that my guest today has had a remarkable life. Raised in Washington, D.C., he was an honor student in high school and received a BA degree in International Studies from the Johns Hopkins University. After a year as a high school teacher, he spent 3 years at Villanova University preparing for the Catholic priesthood, but left to pursue civil service. He then enrolled at Georgetown University, where he earned a Doctor of Law degree and proceeded to practice international law for 6 years. Believing in President Reagan's philosophy of self-reliance, which he learned from his mother, he became a Republican and began to take an active role in Maryland politics. He served as chair of the Prince George's County Central Committee, then headed the Maryland State Republican Central Committee, and in 2002, he won the election for Lieutenant Governor of Maryland. In so doing, he became the first African American to hold statewide office in Maryland's history. In 2003, he received the honorary degree Doctor of Laws from Morgan State University, and in 2005 was named a Fellow in Public Leadership by the Aspen Institute. In 2009, he rose to become chairman of the Republican National Committee. In the following year, the RNC broke fundraising records by raising over $198 million, sweeping the congressional elections. In 2011, he was hired by MSNBC as a political analyst and remains so to this day. He's a faculty fellow at Brown University, an advisor to the Lincoln Project, and hosts his own podcast. Aside from everything I've just mentioned, he just sits around and loafs all day. Well, no, that's not true. It is my great pleasure to introduce this extraordinary gentleman. Welcome, Michael Steele.
Damn, who is? I like to meet this brother. Who is?
Me too.
Hey, Tom, it's so good to be with you, man. This is really cool. Since the last time I saw you, we were at a little bistro in L.A. It was
That's correct.
Kitschy.
We were, weren't we? It was
and that the fact that we were drunk as hell, but otherwise it was really kitschy.
I remember some of it.
No, we weren't.
Anyway,
actually. We were really good.
No, we were good. It was fun. I'd like to start, if I may, with this extraordinary bio of yours. I want to know about your childhood and what it was like growing up.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, there's more to the story, and there's more to that. There's more backstory to that. But I guess the thumbnail is I'm an adopted child, and my mom brought me home from St. Anne's infant home and when I was about, I guess around 6 months old. And so as I got older and learned about that occurrence in my life, it really shaped a lot of my belief and faith system around not just in the strictly political context of life and all of that, but just in terms of appreciating the blessings that you're given, and how random in some respects our lives are. You know, I mean, people just kind of think that, you know, they are where they are because they deserve to be there. I'm like, no, bitch, you just lucky. you were just
Absolutely
lucky.
True.
This is, you know, because this, the turn of a knob or the answering of a phone call, your whole life could have been in a very different space. So my mom is a remarkable woman. She's 93, and I was just with her over Easter.
Oh, she's still here. Oh, that's great.
My gosh. And it's hysterical because we sent her hearing aid out to get new batteries and cleaned up and fixed and all that. So she's got, like you, these big ass earphones on her head, right? To talk to her. And it was so funny. I'm sitting there and she's got these earphones on. I'm like, Mom, how you doing? She's like, oh, I can hear you, baby. You can talk louder. Go ahead. And she was all excited, right? But she's that kind of personality and presence. But here's the rub. My mom was a sharecropper's daughter. She was born and raised in South Carolina, and came to Washington at around 18 following her mom, who had come up about a year or two before to find work for the family. And just a hard work ethic. She worked in one location for about 45 years and really kind of shaped my outlook, my sort of strong independent streak, and really kind of laid this foundation. And she's just an amazing woman, and a blessing that God gave me.
Yes, indeed, my friend.
And
Yes.
she kept me on the straight and narrow. And it was tough because my dad, my adoptive father, was an alcoholic, and he was an abusive alcoholic. So he was not a good man. He was when he wasn't drinking, my mom would tell me he was an amazing person, but when he drank, it was awful. But she said it was fun. She said, but he loved you. And what he would do is he would take me out with him to keep him from drinking. So he would go out and hang out with the fellas. Now at this time, keep in mind, I'm like 3 years old, right? And so he would show up with this, hanging out with his boys with this 3-year-old on his hip. But he did that because, he didn't want to come home drunk, and he didn't want to. And so he would do that from time to time. But when he didn't, it was ugly. It was pretty ugly. So, but I watched her. He passed away when I was 4.
Oh my God, very young.
And it is amazing, Tom, how much I remember. God imprinted him in my mind, and in such a way that I have these vignettes and these moments that I can remember with him. And it's really kind of a stunning part of of my story to just kind of have that piece sort of sitting there, even though it was just for a short time. But she had such perseverance, and later remarried, and she's currently married to my stepdad, who turned 89 in October. So it's just been, I've been blessed, man, and it's because of Maybelle.
That's awesome, man. Good for you. I often ask guests this: what music were you exposed to as a boy?
Oh, now we talking. So I'm the late side of the baby booming generation. So, so those of us who were 58, 59, because that ends at 62. So that 58 to 62 window, we're sort of the crossover generation. So we are that transition that occurred between, the idyllic lifestyle of America in the 1950s and the crash and cruelty and just sort of rawness of the 1960s and 70s. And so started out with the Motown, anything Motown. I'm like, yeah, baby, 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 where did our love go? Yep. So that's, I'm in my room. I've got the Supremes blasting, and I'm miming and dancing in the mirror, as a young kid, and then progress into the 70s. And believe it or not, I really got into rock opera. So yes, Rick Wakeman,
Really? Yeah.
all those guys, I kind of fell in love with that genre of music. And to this day, I still love, I mean, yes, you play a Yes song and I just sit there, okay, you got me, you got my attention. And I write a check for however much you want. So I'm in this space where I'm part of this evolution in music, where you come out of the bebop of the 50s and into the Motown of the 60s, and then into the hard rock, and then of course the R&B that just sort of evolved, Temptations and folks like that. So I love basically all kind of music.
Yeah,
and at that time I loved all kinds of music except country. I just couldn't do the country. But now I have a taste for country. I really, and you know what did it for me? It's the lyrics. I finally understood.
Right.
You guys are telling me the story of my life, right? But you're just singing about it.
The lyrics are so creative, especially now.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
writers,
And
the
so
writers now
I
is
have an
amazing.
eclectic taste for music, in music.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I watched the beginning, lived through, and the death of of disco. And of course, then you moved into what would become hip hop and all of that. And I was a
Yeah.
DJ in college, so that, you know, that
Oh,
kept
yeah.
me tied into the music as well. So that's
Yeah,
how
yeah.
I kind of got through college for about 3 years doing DJ. So
I,
it was,
I actually played on 3 disco hits. One
did you
was
really?
Rapture, Blondie's
Yeah.
Rapture,
Oh,
and
really?
oh yeah, and Rod Stewart's "Do You Think I'm Sexy?" I played a solo on that,
No.
and the other one was what was the other one? Oh, the the disco version of Rhapsody in Blue. There was a guy
Holy.
who put out like Disco Bach and Disco everybody,
I
Disco
know.
Gershwin. It was
I
just
know exactly who you're talking about. I remember because
yeah,
I played
yeah,
that stuff when we would play
yeah.
it in the club in the Rat Skeller at Johns
Sure,
Hopkins, you know.
sure,
But
sure.
it was, it's, gosh, man, you know, every time I talk to you, it is like a music history lesson, but it's also just like a broader history lesson. The people that you have been in space with in
Yeah.
time is just amazing, and sort of charting that part of it.
I had a bit of luck myself, and the
Yeah.
kind of luck you were referring to, Um, I know that or at least I read that you were in Glee Club and in
I
school
was, yeah. Yeah, I grew.
and drama.
Oh my gosh, yeah, yeah, I did. So I had very little exposure when I was in grade school. Although, you know, you did the traditional, you know, I went to Catholic grade school, so we did, you know, everything the nuns would put you in a angel's costume because I was tall and say, stand on the left side of the stage and here, put this halo and some wings on. I'm like, okay.
Right.
So that was it through 8th grade. But then when I got to high school, um, the humanities teacher, which is what we called the arts class at that time,
Yeah.
was Ron Frezzo. I used to call him Dad. He'd become like a father to me in many respects because he really kind of opened my eyes to a whole other world that I'd never been exposed to. And it's not, you know, it's not a smack at my mom and my dad. I mean, they were hardworking. My dad was a civil servant working for the Department of Defense. And my mom worked in a laundromat from 6:30 to 3:30 every day.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I never begrudged them, you know, any of that. Although my mom would occasionally try to get me to go down to the museums in town since they were in our backyard growing up in DC. And I'd be like,
true.
I was like, walking through a museum? No, Mom, I don't want to do that. So it wasn't her fault. It was all on me. But when I got to high school, it changed. And I just, I was sitting in this class and I'll never forget looking at Michelangelo's David. And I was thinking, damn, how did he sculpt? I mean, that's out of marble. He did really? How did
I know,
he do that?
I know. It can't be done, right?
It can't be done.
Ridiculous.
I mean, you know, the musculature and the look and the hair and everything, you know, the physique and I just got caught up to it. So then I realized how much I loved Rembrandt. I love Rembrandt. I love his art and the mastery of it. And so I just found myself liking these various tastes. And he said to me, why don't you join the Glee Club? And I was like, what is that? And he was like, well, we sing. I was like,
We sing.
I don't sing. He was like, no, well, show up. So I showed up and I'm a baritone tenor.
Right.
And I loved it. 4 years of Glee Club. And then that spring, I was in my first show. And guess what it was? Camelot.
Oh, my Lord.
And I played Sir Dinadan in Camelot. And to this day, I remember the lines. And this is from the spring of 1974. The opening lines of Camelot are as follows. By my sainted mother, the carriage has stopped.
Fantastic.
That's it.
And you sang in this stuff as well. You were a singer, as it turned out, then, right?
Yeah, yeah. I sang in, I sang in the chorus in the show and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then later on would go on and do other shows. I played President Wintergreen in Of Thee I Sing.
Wow.
And the culmination of that was, I had two moments of culmination. One was I did Summer Stock in the summer of '76. The director who was directing a high school show said, look, you really should think about doing something, a little bit more professionally, because you've got some talent. I'm saying, oh, okay. I just looked at it. I didn't have to work in the laundromat that summer. So I'm like, Mom, can I go down and do this thing called Summer Stock? And she's like, well, what's that? I'm like, well, it's the kind of acting. You come see the plays. You come to see the plays in high school. Well, you just come and see the plays over the summer. So she was like, okay. And that was a negotiation, by the way, because my mother was not thrilled about my going to spend the summer with all these strange adults that she didn't know. And but I did it.
How old were you at the time?
Let's see, that was 17. Okay,
so close to legal, but not.
Yeah,
quite.
But I could have been 40, and my mother would have been like, "No, you can't do that. I don't know who these people are. You cannot go."
I get you. I get you. Old school.
It was old school, yeah.
Yeah,
it was
man.
Totally old school. But I did it, and I loved it. I loved Summer Stock, and it was Godspell was the show.
Oh, sure.
And I did that. And then okay, so no one knows this. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I'll tell you anyway, because you have this effect on me. You just get me talking. So after that show, the director came to me and said, look, there's this new production that's coming on, and I think you'd be great to go try out for it. And they're doing some really off-Broadway stuff right now, but they're looking for a young cast that they can groom and da-da-da-da. And I hemmed and I hawed and I hawed and I hemmed. And he was really pushing me to do it, because they were holding auditions at Catholic University. And they were coming up, and he was like, you really need you to go do this. And I blushed. Once I got all the specific and the details, it would have meant, at least a half a year on the road and da-da-da. Wow. And I was getting ready to graduate, and I was, ready to go off to college. And I didn't want to have that conversation with Maybelle.
I guess not.
I'm just going to take some time off, Mom. Well, the show turned out to be Joseph and his amazing
Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yes.
Oh my
Lord.
The
show. And trust me, a year and a half later, I was kicking myself in the pants. Trust me. I was like, are you kidding me? But it was moments like that. And I went on to Hopkins and wound up doing Music Man. I was Harold Hill there. So yeah, I love theater.
So obviously you had an affection for it and an ability for it, but you didn't. It didn't occur to you at some point to just go for a musical or dramatic career.
It did, and I'll tell you when it did, and this is how I was talking myself out of doing what God wanted me to do. So my senior year at Hopkins, I'm an international relations major. Was thinking about law school, but I had this nagging question in my heart and in my head about the priesthood. And I love the Augustinians to this day. They taught me in high school at Carroll High School in DC. And so I would go up to the order, visit the order at Villanova every year while I was in, from high school on. I mean, I'd always go and spend time there. So I really got to know the brothers and the fathers there. And I said, I think I'm going to join. The order. And all my friends, It was a complete shock to my friends, because the last thing they thought I would be doing, given the kind of individual I was in college, would be joining the priesthood. But a friend of mine said to me, well, given where, some of these priests are, it's not surprising. Well, I'm not that kind of crazy, but it was fun. It was a wonderful experience. So I decided to go to LA the week after graduating college. And I figured I would go, a buddy of mine and I would go out, and I would spend the entire summer traveling the West Coast, but specifically from the very top of California to the Tijuana border, and
Right.
and I did, and I loved it. And my goal was to go out and think about doing something in TV or movies or something like that.
Oh, okay. So
I
it
thought about
did
it.
cross your
I
mind.
thought about it.
Yeah.
And then I realized how much I really wanted to eat and decided, no, I think I'll go back to Villanova. The food is much better there.
Oh
I
my
went
God,
back.
that's great.
I did that summer, and then that beginning of August, I flew back home and got in the car and drove up to Villanova and entered the monastery.
Wow. Wow. And are you, as you say, you shocked all your friends? You hadn't
Yeah, I
expressed
shocked my
these
mom
desires to
too.
any of them?
Huh?
Really? So you hadn't expressed these desires to
Well, my
even
mom
her
was,
or
you got to keep in mind, my mom is a convert to Catholicism.
ah,
So she comes out of the Kojic, the Church of God in Christ tradition, which is the holiest of the holy rollers. I mean,
oh, I see.
these, speaking in tongues and the whole,
Yeah.
it's very, very intense. And I
Right.
would literally, growing up, serve the 6 o'clock mass or the 7 o'clock mass, depending, then get on a bus with my cousins and go cross town into Northeast to their church, which was the church my mom was in, with my aunt and her kids, and my cousins. And I would spend the rest of my day at the Kojic church. So I start out with Catholic Mass in Latin, and
Wow.
I spend the rest of the day in speaking tongues. It was hysterical. It was hysterical.
Man.
And I just, so I had this sort of whipsaw experience. But I appreciate it. And I, have an intense interest in religion anyway. So and
Right.
other faith traditions. So for me, it was kind
Sure.
of a learning experience. But when I went to my mom and said I wanted to become a priest, she looked at me, and the first question she asked me was, well, you can still have grandkids, right? I can still have grandkids, right? And I went, no, that's
Of
not how it
course.
works. You may have some, but trust me,
They're not going to be
can't tell
mine.
anybody.
Oh, yeah, right.
So,
Oh, Lord.
yeah, because
Oh,
she's
my
coming
God.
out of tradition where pastors, would have families, and
I
by
get
that
it.
time
That's
she'd
right.
been a Catholic since the 1950s. So we
Yeah.
weren't talking, about 25, 30 years. And I figured you figured that out by now, Mom. This is not how it operates on this side. But it was funny.
Oh
It was funny.
man. Well, see now. So you spent 3 years
Did,
there,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I
In
donned my habit
and,
and
and
took
then
my
and then
promises.
you were going to be ordained very close to that time.
I left because I was in a religious order. I wasn't in the traditional parish priest or archdiocesan program.
What's I don't know the difference.
So a religious order like the Augustinians, the Franciscans, Capuchins, and are monks or friars.
Oh, right,
Augustinians are friars,
right.
and they live under a rule of the founder of the order. So the
Ah,
Benedictines live under the order of the rules of Saint Benedict. The Augustinians live under the rule of Saint Augustine. So when Saint Augustine founded the Augustinians 900, well over about 1,000 years ago, he set out how you live your life as a friar, and it would
okay.
sort of talk about your spirituality
Right.
and all of that. So when you go through the formation process, you enter what they call the pre-novitiate, which is a period where you kind of discern and decide and figure out, okay, is this where God's calling me? Is this my life? Then you go to novitiate, where it's a more intensive level of study, where
Wow.
you then, at the end of which, you take what they call simple vows, where when you come in, you make a promise to live a life of poverty, chastity, and obedience.
Right.
Whereas a priest, a parish priest, only promises to live a life of chastity and obedience. They don't take vows. They make promises to live a chaste life and an obedient life, obedient to the bishop.
Yes.
Chaste, obviously. Whereas a monk or a friar in a religious order, takes a vow to live that way exclusively.
Right.
So I couldn't own property, et cetera, and
Wow.
that whole story. But yeah, man, it was an interesting, and it shaped who I am, I think. And not I think I know it really shaped and set my mind a certain way when it comes to public service and how to express that and live that out every day.
But here's the thing that I find very interesting is you went from an order like that, which of course I assume it to be a very peaceful, reflective, meditative.
Yeah, there are days when it's peaceful and meditative, but it's a bunch of men, just kind of corralling. It actually is. No, it is. No, it is. I mean, there is a contemplative nature to it, although not exclusively, because it's the Augustinians are a teaching order. So, Merrimack and high schools, Merrimack University, obviously, and then high schools. And there are a number of universities like Villanova, Merrimack that they run, high schools that they order. So they're a teaching order. So they're very much in the community. And carrying out their service. So it's not like some of the more contemplative orders like the Trappists or the Carthusians. That's
what I had in my head, right?
Yeah, they're much more exclusive and spend a lot of their day in contemplation, prayer, and work. And the work is working the farm or making bread or whatever their particular service is.
But then, of course, you elected to insert yourself into the boiling cauldron of politics.
Well, that always, yeah. Well, look, I figured I'd learn from the biggest, baddest political institution on the planet, which is the Catholic Church. So
true enough.
They've been shaping this for over 2,000 years. So I kind of, it works.
Did you just get up on a day one day and say, okay, I'm leaving this 3 years?
No, I'll tell you, to be honest with you, Tom, the hardest thing to do is leave. A lot of people think it's tough to go in. Yeah, it's tough to go in, but it's harder to leave. It's harder to come out, which has been a problem for the church, as we now know, because there are a lot of men and some women who should have been allowed to leave. If not escorted out the door.
Yes, that's true. I know.
It's a real delicate subject because even the church doesn't want to be in a position where it dictates your vocation, because this is a gift from God. And so you can't insert yourself in between that. The church can't insert themselves, but someone has to manage it. Right. So you may feel you have a calling from God, but if you're actually a son of a bitch, or you've got other predilections that are dangerous and disturbing, then someone has got to break that and say, I think you're misunderstanding or misinterpreting your vocation, and the church, I think, has learned to do that since I left, because a lot of that narrative has now been exposed and continues to be exposed, and as well it should. The church went through a period where it panicked after the Second Vatican Council, when a lot of priests and nuns said, "Oh, you opened the doors and the windows, we can leave," and they bolted, right? They bolted, and they panicked, and they started taking these whack jobs. And these misfits and others who clearly were danger to young kids, and did not have the various testing and psychological and other profiling programs in place to make sure that they were getting good men and women to serve the congregations across the globe. And they've learned from that, because I know when I entered, by the time I entered in 81, I had to go through a battery of psychological exams. And so they were starting to get serious because they realized, oops, we got to check.
We got to check these people.
Yeah, we may have a problem. So they started to put some of those tests in place. The politics for me is always been there because I grew up in a political town in Washington, D.C. So a lot of my friends were the children of, some pretty notable political figures in D.C. And around D.C. So I got to see some of that. And for me, there is this equation between public service as a elected official, or some other public role, and vocation or service to God's people through a life as a priest or deacon or other servant within the church. And so the question I remember asking myself in my final months with the Augustinians was, okay, God, what are you asking me to do? Are you asking me to do this wearing a habit or a business suit? Because that's how I kind of had to break it down,
Okay.
I know
you chose the latter.
I know you want me to serve. Now just tell me how you want me to do it. It wasn't a question of, oh, gee, am I going to do this or am I going to do that? Because the common thread between the two of them was service. So how do I serve your people? Do I serve them in a way in which I have sort of a micro impact, parish, school, or a macro as a public official or in some other public capacity where you can have a more broad effect at one time or impact at one time.
Sure.
So that was a big struggle in the last year to sort of figure that out. And in fact, when I came home from the seminary, I contacted the Archdiocese of Washington to talk about joining their program because I thought it was more of a style versus substance issue whereas being in a part of a religious order is one thing versus being a part of a diocesan structure where you have the chance to move about more frequently. You can, your bishop can send you to Rome to study, which I wanted to be a church lawyer. So a canon lawyer. So I could go to Rome. I was hoping, maybe go to Rome and get in the diplomatic corps of the church and yada, yada, yada. So, so there are all these sort of secular elements, if you will, that were part of a more religious conversation as well. So it was very dynamic period. I probably bored you too much with this.
Not at all. Now, this is fascinating.
Your listeners are probably going, oh my God, this poor boy is so confused.
Well, to hell with him. No, see, I came from a family. My parents, I had one Republican and one Democrat. My mother was a Republican. My dad was a Democrat. So, and I grew up I was a little kid during the Eisenhower years. And of course, what the hit on him was, the Eisenhower doll, you wind it up and it does nothing for 8 years. Right. And then the hit on, even though that's not even remotely true, but in any case, and the hit on, I remember Adlai Stevenson, who ran a couple of times. I remember he was branded an egghead and therefore, unable to grasp the realities of the people and their needs. Right. He's up there in the clouds somewhere. So I heard that debate going on for a long time. And I've kind of leaned Democrat most of my life, but you know what? To this day, I'm like, hey, you got a good idea? Win me over. I'm open. I'll listen, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's how my mom kind of raised me. So both my parents were Democrats. My entire family was Democrats, except for one aunt who was a Republican and no one talked to her. So I haven't figured out if it was because she was a Republican or probably because she was a Republican. But that was that time, she was the sort of the last of the Black Republicans who did not make the move after 62, 63, 64, where Republicans had kind of stated that they were ready and willing to go in a different direction with the likes of Barry Goldwater and his, acceptance of segregation, and rejection of literally the civil rights history of the Republican Party with his, something is no vice craziness. But
yes, yeah.
yeah. But the realities were that my mom, as I got older, again, in keeping with how she raised me, gave me an independent thought, independent mind, and said, well, don't be a Democrat because I'm a Democrat or the family's a Democrat. Go out and figure out what you want to do and do it. Don't follow people, be a leader, and don't, submit yourself or suppress your views because you're afraid of what someone's going to say, which is why my mouth always gets me in trouble. But, it's just, you followed any of my time at the RNC,
well, I want to get to that. I just remembered extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in the whatever is no virtue.
It's no virtue, right. It's that extremism part that kind of sealed the deal.
It certainly did.
Extremism in defense of liberty. I'm like, oh, you mean like storming the Capitol in January of 2020, January 6th of 2021? Okay.
For example.
Right, for example.
Well,
I don't think so.
You brought this up, and I'd like to pursue it just a little bit. The Republican Party, certainly at the start of your career in politics and at other times, has not been known for its racial diversity. How hard was it
in recent times? Before that, it's a very different story.
Was it hard for you in the beginning? Did you ever feel like giving up, that you just weren't going to be accepted?
Well, it's always been hard. Like I said, I had one aunt who was a Republican, and she used to whisper that to me. So it wasn't something.
I see.
It wasn't something you would bring. Look, when I told my mom that I was registering as a Republican, after all of her encouragement to go up and do what you want to do, and don't be a Democrat because I'm a Democrat. She looked at me and go, "Why would you do that?" I'm like, because you told me I could be who I wanted to be.
Fantastic.
But it's always been hard. I mean, I've been caught in this vortex between the Black community as a Black man and Republicans and Democrats, largely the white community as a Republican. And so, early on in my career, a lot of folks looked at me as a traitor and a Uncle Tom, and then white Republicans would look at me as someone that they could scapegoat and get behind, and sort of put them out there and go, see, we got one too. And I'm like, okay, all right, so I figured this out, so it's always been a rude awakening for both. It's certainly in dealing with me, because I don't fit anyone's stereotype, and I don't subscribe to this sort of jaundiced view of our politics and how we play out those narratives. Look, the country is multifaceted, and I think the political system should be multifaceted. I always have. I've always advocated for more political parties, and I'm a conservative, but I'm not stupid, and I recognize that I may be pro-life, but there are maybe 10 people standing around me who are pro-choice. So you've got to appreciate the environment that you're in, and you have to try to govern effectively and cooperatively in that environment. And it is the one element in our politics today that is missing, is that our political, and I refuse to use the term leaders because they don't act like leaders any longer. They act like little sycophantic a-holes who are fighting over a lollipop that is covered with crap off the floor, and they've given up on the idea of principled governing leadership. So no one's doing that, and so when you have this environment that has become so toxic and so poisonous, that turns off so many people, you wind up getting what we've gotten over the last 20 years. You wind up seeing it culminate in what we saw happen on January 6th. And then, of course, all those elements come together in moments like George Floyd. And so you've got this these crashing realities, and the country right now is starving for men and women of good faith, and I don't mean that in a religious sense, but
Right.
who have faith in the constitutional idea of this nation,
Right.
and who are willing to risk their own political fortune and life, if you will, to secure that for every citizen, whether they arrived here legally or illegally, whether they arrived here on a slave ship or the Mayflower, but are nonetheless still here. And that wonderful woman standing in that New York harbor with that light held over her head, calling out to us to bring our they're tired and poor
and
right,
huddled masses yearning to be free,
longing to be free. That still has value.
Yeah.
So now the goal is to work it out. just work it out, and
that's right. That's right.
That's the test that we seem to be failing.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Are you concerned about the growing chasm between rich and poor in this country? And
I always have been.
What, if anything, should the federal government do about it?
Well, it's a combination of forces that have to come together. I mean, I grew up in a working class household. My mom was a minimum wage when she retired. She was making, what was minimum wage at that time? So $3.28 an hour.
God. Oh my God.
Okay. What's the minimum wage now? $7.25.
Something, yeah.
She retired 30 some years ago, folks. So this is not, all right. It was like 1992. So there it is,
Jeez.
30 years ago. 30 years ago.
I guess the question is, how the hell did she do it?
Well, that is the miracle of perseverance and hard work.
Yes.
I'll never forget, when I was older, we were having a conversation because she told me the story after my dad died. Our parish priest, good Monsignor Miltonberger, and members of our own family came to her and said, Maybelle, you should really go on public assistance, because the check that you will get from the government for your son won't be enough to cover your husband's paycheck, and
right.
you're making at that time $1 something an hour or whatever it was,
right.
and it won't be enough. You should go on welfare. And my mother said, no. She said, I was like, well, why? This was when I was older. She said, as I told them, I did not want the government raising my child. And so she kind of had this mindset that today people would look at in a political context, but she looked at it in an American context. For her, it was about, I know, I'll work this out. I got this.
It was personal for her.
It was personal. Yeah. And it's not, and she would tell me later on, she said, no, I wasn't, bad mouthing anybody else who wanted to do that. I just said, for me.
Right.
Now, I'm not going to begrudge somebody else, some other family or, woman in her similar situation who decides, I want to go, I'll take the public assistance. But she said for her. And so is that kind of that appreciation of individual liberties and individualism that sort of fed me for a lot of that. And so this idea that the poor and the caste system that we've devolved into is a very powerful thing to be conscious of. And again, sort of bringing my religious training into it, Christ made it very clear to us, you will always have the poor among you. And his test to us in the unanswered and the unspoken question was, how will you treat them? And then he would go on and connect that dot for you when he would say, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink.
Right.
When I was alone, you comforted me. When I was in prison, you visited me. So he tried to get us to understand the poor is here. They're here. You can't look away. You can't hide from them. So now the question is, how do you serve them?
Right.
And he gave us stones to step on to do that, the stepping stones that we would need to do that. And so then you take that lesson and you ramp it up and say, okay, how does this institution carry out this charge to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and to provide for the widow and, to go through those lessons.
Sure.
And that's where that's the concept of the government safety net.
Right.
And even that now is something that people want to fight over, because it becomes, well, and we heard it just during the pandemic. Well, if we give them help, they're just going to take the money and spend it on something we don't want them to spend it on.
Yeah,
that's not your choice.
No. No,
if a family is in need, trust me, if you lined up 100 families, you may find one where some idiot would take the check and go spend it on something other than the needs of that
gamble
family.
it or drink it. Yeah, right.
Right. And I know that firsthand because I know what my daddy used to do.
Sure.
Right. So I'm not. Yep. It's not lost on me. But that doesn't absolve you of your responsibility to provide for the needs of that family or that individual.
That can't be an indictment of the concept of a safety net.
You're not allowed to make that judgment.
Right.
The only thing the Gospels ask us to do is to help, to serve. Christ didn't say to you, well, I would heal you of your blindness, but all you're going to go out there and look at some porn, so I'm not going to heal your blindness. Right. There's nothing like that old Middle East porn, right? Back in 2,000 years ago, when they sort of etch it into a wall, You've been to Pompeii? It's amazing.
That's right.
But Christ didn't make that judgment. The woman at the well, he didn't judge her. The woman who was brought to him as an adulteress. And the only thing he asked was, okay, so those of you without sin, cast the first stone.
Right. Amen. And
when they all threw their rocks down and walked away, Christ went over to you and said, where are your accusers? Because you have none, nor do I accuse you. Right. Hello. That's what we should be about as people.
Yep.
And at times like COVID-19, how dare you, when you have the ability and the resources as an institution like government? And look, I'm not a big government Republican, trust me.
I don't think you are. I sincerely think you're not. Right.
But what I am is someone who understands and appreciates that if the resources are there, make them available to the least among us.
Bingo. Right.
That's it.
Right.
And we worry about on the back end, all the other stuff. We'll take care of that,
Right.
But it just, which is why I appreciate Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden is bringing sort of that, just because he's a Catholic, he's a fellow Catholic, and I understand what he's doing in that term.
That's right.
He's bringing that sort of charism, that idea of a preferential treatment for the poor, but the preferential treatment for people in need to this crisis.
Yes.
And look, we're now 150 million people have gotten the vaccine. You've got COVID is flatlining. Yeah, it's sort of spiking in some places where people being stupid, but okay. And now, you've got $2,000, $600, and then $1,400. You've gotten a check to sort of help at least, and they try to backstop, landlords from putting people out of their apartments and their homes. And look, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Until we can get back on our feet, right? At least that's what I think. So
you must look forward to the day, whatever that is, hopefully it is, when the Republican Party kind of redeems itself and absorbs the values that, quote unquote, made them famous,
Yeah,
the
Tom, I don't think that's going to happen, brother. I don't think that's going to happen.
Wow.
I think there's going to be a further breakdown, diminishment of that Republican value, ideal, whatever. Trump is not going away. Yes. That's been made very clear. Yeah. You've had in recent weeks Republican leaders from McCarthy and McConnell to the wackos like what's her name, Boebert and Congressman Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Oh yeah.
All state emphatically, this is his party. Okay. The one thing I've learned along the way, particularly given having to, deal with people in crisis when I was, in my seminary work and certainly even in my public service work, you can't help those who don't want to be helped. There is a point where
that's true.
You just have to stop.
That's true.
And we've all had that family member who's had an issue, and the families rallied to try to help with that issue, and they just don't want the help.
I gotcha.
They do. They do everything they can to resist, fight against it, turn it down, move on, and double down on the bad behavior. And at some point, you just go, okay.
Something that hasn't been mentioned too often and really bothered me is when the Republicans held their convention and decided not to have a platform.
I know. Well,
what? Excuse me?
Well, that kind of made sense, because you'd have to state, a platform states what you believe.
Oh, that says a lot, doesn't it? Shoot. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's sad. That's sad. That's not good for this country. I cry for the country, not having the benefit.
We'll do whatever he says.
Oh man.
What do you think's going to happen? How do you think that turns out?
Not well.
It's unfortunate. Not well. Not well. Not well.
Now, you got involved with the Lincoln Project. Are you still active in that?
I am not. I actually wound up leaving Lincoln Project the week after the election,
right?
Because I was asked to come in to advise on the efforts, in the last quarter of the campaign season, so from about August to November, and so I, did what I could to sort of help, which was I felt my personal charge was to defeat a bad president.
Right.
And I stand proud as an American saying that we defeated a bad president.
Mission accomplished. Well, yeah. I admire so much the people that are part of that, who are all former Republicans, I guess, right? All, I mean,
most are former. There's still some alive, some live Republicans there. Not too many. Yeah, they've had a tough go of it recently, and it's unfortunate to see a lot of that good work get messed up in personal BS. But I think that work still stands as important work, number one. And I think whether it's in this iteration or some other iteration down the road, or maybe some other group sort of steps up and fills that sort of democracy space with their service. We're going to need that. We're going to need it again in 2022, because people need to strap in. 20 was the warm up, baby.
Oh,
it was
God.
the warm up. Y'all see, this is my beef with the American people, is that we get lazy after an election.
Yes.
And we think, well, I did that after all the haranguing and people, pushing me to go. I voted. I'm done. I'm like, no, baby, you ain't done. No, you're not done.
Right.
If you don't think you're done, you believe you're done, then look at what's happening in Georgia and Arizona. Look what they're trying to do in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. You're not done.
Shameful.
You're not done. So 20 was a warm up. And just because Trump is not on the ballot, don't think he won't be anywhere around or near ballots.
Oh, he'll be around.
He's going to be pushing certain candidates out there. He's going to be sending out, his message. He's trying to create his own form of Twitter platform so he can express himself without the oversight of somebody other than himself.
Yeah.
So this isn't over. And so people need to continue their efforts to register and to participate, because the battle for who controls the Senate and the House is going to be at stake. And remember, that battle is going to get played out after, when you start electing state legislators come next year. Well, come this year, because you have the first round of state legislators in New Jersey and Virginia being elected this year, this off year in some instances. So those new legislatures will start drawing the new congressional lines. So everybody, all my progressive and liberal friends out there who bitch about, redistricting. Well, guess what? If you keep that Republican legislature, what lines do you think they're going to draw?
Let me think. Yeah.
They're not going to be drawing them for you. That's for sure.
No.
So, and what does that mean? It means that, the Republicans likely will take the House back next year.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean for Joe Biden to have Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan calling the shots in the House of Representatives.
Oh, God help us.
So I mean, these are the things you got. It's true. Elections have consequences.
That's what I've heard. I've heard that.
You've heard that somewhere, right?
Well, listen. Before I let you go, I do have a personal question to ask you. Many of my friends have commented that you are a very stylish dresser when you're on the air.
Oh.
Where do you get your fashion sense?
Thank you very much. No, some great coupon, please. It's like the music. It kind of comes from a lot of different places. I mean, I love. So, for example, I really love the stylish look of men in the 1930s and 40s.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
Those boys could dress. There's just something sophisticated about the way their clothes sort of, fell on their bodies and how they look with the hats. It was just such a classic look.
I know.
I do like that. I try to go out and get things that sort of fit my personality and my nature a little bit. So, it's always amusing to me when I do a hit, and particularly if I think I said something that was particularly insightful and important, and I'll get a text message from a friend that goes, "Man, you look good tonight." I'm like, "Did you hear what I said?"
Anyway, Michael, it's been a joy talking to you.
Thank you, my friend. Same here.
A fascinating individual and a great guy, and I appreciate your time. And I hope we see you again very, very soon.
Well, absolutely, my pleasure. And I have to say, you're I told you this from the first moment I met you. You're one of the coolest guys I know. And every time we get to talking and spending time, particularly in the space that you occupy, I'm like a student at your knee, man. It's just like it is pure history. The stories are wonderful, and I'm glad to call you my buddy.
Thank you. Same to you, my friend. All right. Well, take care.
All right,
and see you down the line.
You got it, my friend.
Okay.
Take care now.
Tom Scott's Podcast Express is produced by Dave Schroeder and Joseph Vella. If you like the Podcast Express, tell your friends, write a review, and subscribe to the series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other fine podcast directories. Tom Scott's Podcast Express uses Blue microphones and Zoom Corporation audio recorders. Tom Scott plays R.S. Berkeley musical instruments. For more information or to ask Tom a question, visit tomscottmusic.com. Until next time.